speaking of what's going on in Congress, let me ask you, what's your take on this stimulus package? And I'll share on my screen a little data visualization because it is the Nerds channel. This is where the 2 trillion went. A lot of it went to corporations, small business loans. Direct payments to families is looks like about 15%, but then if you add unemployment insurance, so it might get up to 30% between the two of them. And then 300 billion in tax cuts, and then a little bit for hospitals, 126 billion. When you looked at that bill, if you were in Congress, would you say, well, I think it could be improved, but I'd still vote for it? And then if you would have had a say in how it turned out, what would you do differently?
Yeah, I mean, it's great, and we have to celebrate that cash is going to people's hands now, or at least sometime in the near future. But overall, it's an embarrassment. And the tiny fraction that went to a stimulus and direct bailout of people, as opposed to, let's say, United Airlines, which then scheduled layoffs immediately after September, is just totally embarrassing, but not inconsistent with even just a decade ago after the financial crisis. But yeah, I mean, it's it's just we didn't learn in many ways.
Yeah. It's sad. I mean, you could have given everyone $500 a month for a year and then had a few $100 billion left over for hospital and sort of ICU and critical care. And instead, I guess we'll save United Airlines. And which is, it's sad because it's also very temporary. It's very we'll put a Band-Aid on this. And basic income could have been such a transformative opportunity for us. If there was ever a time where the country might have been willing to think of something different, we could have just positioned it as a 1-year thing. And I think we would have seen the benefits, and people would have been like the Alaskans, no, you don't ever stop this. This is working great. But I mean, I guess in some ways, I feel like the Democratic Party, was part of this process and, missed an opportunity as well. I don't feel like we can blame this entirely on Mitch McConnell.
Oh, I mean, I think, all the powers that be were complicit in this. And I think, it was Pelosi's chief of staff, and basically all the power players, now they're Schumer, included, who were we must have means testing. We must assure that it's targeted payments to those who need it. And we must have income thresholds. And it was, most powerfully from Democratic leadership that, had to ensure that the cash payments to people were means tested.
Yeah. It's very kind of 1980s thinking, in my opinion. But hope that's why we need some new ideas, some fresh thinkers to get to DC. So Kristen wants to ask you a question. I did not ask her to ask this, but I
definitely
do
not a plant.
But I will highlight it for sure. She says, "Do you commit to being a guest on Nerds for Humanity at least one time a year when you are a congressperson?"
Wow, that is an automatic yes.
Yay!
Good job, Kristen.
Thank you.
You did it. You forced my hand on it.
I mean, what do you think is do you think that Congress people will be more accessible as time and technology advances? It feels like I remember growing up and I could kind of know my Congress people's names. I might, because I was a nerd, see them from time to time on C-SPAN or stuff. But I never felt like I would get to know them the way folks are getting to know you, or they got to know Andrew or Mike or Heidi or any of these really interesting people in the Yang Gang that are running. Do you think this is like going to be the new normal, or do you think this is like those crazy Yang Gang people? They love to open up and sit for 1 hour live streams.
I mean, in many ways, this is society's new normal, right? With social media and pervasive surveillance, in that, like, with very few exceptions, essentially, like, we all have opened ourselves in all parts of our lives to be, open and recorded and shared widely. And I think, like, really credit to Alexandria in many ways, who even documented what her introduction and foray into Congress was. And just really opening up the book and opening up the kind of black box, I think is very powerful. And pulling back the veneer and the facade, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, you wonder if this level of accessibility. I mean, the cynic in me is like, well, when folks are sort of trying to challenge an incumbent, and they're not getting calls from the prime time all the time.
What do you mean?
They're going to be
out
more
on Cooper for this. What are you talking about?
That's right. You're like, Anderson, I cannot talk to you right now. I'm on the Nerd Show. But it's like, the incentive will be, once you do get into Congress, let's be positive and think like visualize success. Once you're there, your team is going to be saying like, whoa, why would you sit for an hour with a guy that's going to ask you all kinds of questions when you can do like a 3-minute interview, on Face the Nation? They'll ask you some tough questions, but we're going to prep you, and we're not going to let you get into trouble. You sit with an hour with Tom, you're going to talk about Alaska. You may mention the moose thing, or you're going to piss off people who did go to Harvard, and now they're not going to give money because you're kind of like taking away the elusive brand value, blah, blah, blah. I mean, because you are putting yourself out there when you have these long form conversations. How do you think you'll resist the kind of the game theory of it, which is like, well, what do I gain by putting myself out there? I'm already in the Beltway now.
Yeah. So I think first thing I want to say is, like, I don't want you or anyone in the, like, Yang Gang media world to sell themselves short. Like, I know we all feel on this fundamental level, maybe like we're all kind of outsiders, like we're not a part of the belt. I think one of the big goals of this is to create the new Beltway, like create the new set of default institutions where it's like, you got to go on freaking Nerds for Humanity if you want to get like the Yang Gang support, which will mean a lot. Right. And so I think it's like, thinking of like, one of the things that the Bernie movement was very effective in doing is they defined the narrative, right? They defined what progressivism supposedly is. And they had not only set up a whole host of media alternatives, they also set up a whole host of organizations, from Our Revolution to Justice Democrats to Brand New Congress and the Young Turks, and all these platforms that provided endorsements and resources and credibility, institutional know-how, and made sure that people fell in line, right? Like, you had to endorse the party line. You have to endorse the Bernie agenda, banning private insurance, $15 minimum wage, federal jobs guarantee baked into the Green New Deal. If you want that Brand New Congress or Justice Democrats endorsement, which comes with the institutional know-how, the credibility, the press, the awareness, those kind of general notoriety around the movement. And so I think, like, we have to do the same, but in our own positive way. As Freedom Democrats or as Nerds for Humanity, or like as any kind of node in this network, become that default definitive institution. And so, like, Tom, like, you're going to be and you already are a very central part in that. And it will, like, become so much more than just, you and this channel. Like, in defining like this new wave of people running. But to your particular question about like, you know, the incentives being all like fucked up and kind of kooky, like in the before and after phase, like you're probably right. I think the one thing is that there is just in the sort of, you know, strict incentive game, like an incentive to maintain consistency. And so if you like, you know, if you are sort of this like have been branded as like an authentic person, and those were kind of the tailwinds that like helped you get there in the first place, then like like that's like a pretty shitty thing to like abandon. But B, you're probably not going to do very well if you suddenly, you know, change course.
Yeah.
Now, of course, like has it been done before? Is this how people entrench their power all sorts of ways? Absolutely. But yeah, I guess a lot of it comes down to trust, and this is also in part why we need to have term limits, and why, you know, we have these cyclical elections where we get to reassess, like, did they live up to their promise? In the case of congressional seats, literally every 2 years.
And we do have you on video pledging to come on the Nerds channel once a year.